I want to begin this review by saying something I usually save for the end of these videos. This movie is not as bad as everyone thinks. It currently sits at a 3.3 rating on IMDb. I mean, that's 0.3 lower than Stan Helsing. It in no way deserves that low of a rating. That being said, it's not a great movie either. It's your standard big screen remake of an old sitcom.
One of these days, you're gonna push me too far.
The only thing that could push you is a bulldozer.
All right, get out!
One day you are gonna push me too far.
The only thing that can push you is a bulldozer.
Mom?
But why is this one so hated? Well, let's address the elephant in the room.
Peanuts! What am I gonna do with peanuts?
Eat 'em like any other elephant.
This movie cast black performers in roles that were originated by white performers. And for the record, I actually think that's a decision that works. It shows that there was a genuine effort to set this film apart from the series that inspired it. I've never quite understood why film remakes of sitcoms try so hard to closely replicate those original characters and performances. Unless it's for pure ironic purposes, like in the Brady Bunch movies, I just don't see the point. I'd rather be watching the original than something that closely replicates it. Cedric the Entertainer and Mike Epps actually do a decent job of honoring the dynamic that Jackie Gleason and Art Carney masterfully displayed on the original show, while also making the characters their own.
Oh my
God. Ash, what'd you do now?
They wanted me to fix their pipes, baby.
Yeah, like a big hole in the wall.
Oh, that's where the pipes are, Ralph.
There are a lot of people who unfairly wrote this movie off because of the casting, and don't get me wrong, this movie deserves to be forgotten, but not at all because of the casting, rather for its weak plot, and because it takes characters and motivations that were rooted in a very specific period in American culture, and then tries to apply them to a modern setting.
Beyonce is more peach-shaped, like the way Shaka Khan used to be back in the day.
Oh, Shaka Khan used to be built like a bleach bottle back in the day.
Good gosh.
It essentially becomes a remake in name only. Not to mention, the script is also terribly bland, being written by screenwriters whose track record includes big mamas like Father Like Son, Deck the Halls, and Agent Cody Banks 2. I made a video last year that covered the entire history of the Honeymooners. I talked about how the show was born from the real-life frustrations of star Jackie Gleason growing up. The characters resonated with TV audiences in the 1950s because there were so few depictions on TV like them at the time. In an era when sitcom families were defined by suburban luxury and white picket fences, the Honeymooners represented a very real portion of America. Lower-class working families that could never seem to get a leg up. The Cramden's rundown Brooklyn apartment, the main set for most episodes, was only one room. They had a bedroom, although we never got to see it. They also had no electric refrigerator, sofa, TV set, or even curtains.
Poor Alice hasn't got an electric stove. Poor Alice hasn't got a vacuum cleaner. You call your mother and tell her she can't come.
I can't. Poor Alice hasn't got a phone either.
A lot of these episodes were like stage plays, with few secondary locations used. This really drove the main character's motivations. Ralph Cramden's constant get-rich schemes were not just because he wanted to make it big, but because he wanted to give his wife the life she so deserved.
See, this is pretty important to me this time, Norton. I don't want to fail. I want to make a success of myself.
The Honeymooners sometimes gets wrongly cited for encouraging domestic violence in a comedic context, but to those who actually watch the show, you know that wasn't the case. Yes, Ralph had a short-fused temper, which wouldn't have remotely worked had his wife Alice not been written and portrayed as such a strong-willed, incredibly smart, independent woman who was infinitely wiser than her husband. Jackie Gleason was never afraid to show how dead wrong Ralph could be at the end of the day, with many episodes ending having his character groveling, trying to beg for his wife's forgiveness. Alice was also never afraid to be aggressive right back at Ralph, with countless well-timed comebacks and jabs at her husband's expense.
In there is one pair of pants. Why is one pair of pants of mine in that drawer?
Because one pair of your pants is all that'll fit in there.
And honestly, that's something that this movie accurately carries over. Alice is played by Gabrielle Union here, and she brings that essential fiery energy back to the character. Cedric the Entertainer also brings Ralph's overly confident, loudmouth tendencies to the role.
Trixie makes Ed French toast.
That's because Ed's not on trim spell.
Oh, you got jokes. You just a regular UPN sitcom, huh, Alice?
And Mike Epps manages to bring Ed Norton's buffoonery and physical comedy back to life. I was actually amazed at how well these two carry the spirit of Gleason and Carney in their own way.
Hey, I'm a flip.
Flip, Ed. Heads.
No, I wanted heads.
Well, tails then.
I wanted tails too. I got a big appetite for tails too.
That's right.
I'm gonna do it.
Regina Hall plays Norton's wife Trixie and is just there. Her character is more like Norton, being a little ditzy in this adaptation, and she doesn't really serve the plot much, other than she just has to be there. I also like how they made the effort to replicate the characters' 1950s wardrobes to the present day. But other than that, the plot is where the faithful adapting is lost. The story is basically what would have been the plot on an episode of the show. It starts simple enough. Trixie and Alice discover that their dream duplex is for sale. They have 2 weeks to work up a down payment of $20,000 before an evil banker, played by Eric Stoltz, buys the property. And the banker angle is pretty weak. It gives the movie this weird 90s kids movie element that just doesn't fit.
Kinda wishing you hadn't dropped out of high school right about now, huh?
Still ignoring you.
I'd expect this character in a movie where a dog is the hero, but not in a Honeymooners story. Ralph and Ed end up wasting their savings bidding on a dilapidated railway car that they plan to turn into a tour bus.
Hitako Kawakami.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Hikato Kamakwami.
Which falls through when they lack the funds to get their car excavated out of the sewer.
Okay, we're just gonna roll it out.
We're gonna roll it out.
How you gonna do that when all you have is 20 feet of track?
Some of my favorite Honeymooners episodes are the ones where Ralph and Norton try to outsmart their wives, but fail miserably. There's one where they wake up early and try to sneak out fishing without Alice and Trixie, only the girls wake up first and beat them to it. It's a simple setup that shows how the wives were always wiser than the husbands.
They find out that we left without them. They're gonna be mighty mad when we get home tonight. Oh.
The plot in this movie starts simple enough, then just gets more and more muddled as the movie goes on. To raise money for their tour bus venture, Ralph and Ed start breakdancing, panhandling, even making up a fake charity to con people out of their money. Ralph and Ed in the original show had a lot of schemes, but none of them were ever malicious, with the intent being to con people out of money. So it's an element here that just doesn't fit. They then save a greyhound from a dumpster one night, which eventually leads to them pursuing dog racing as a way to make money.
How many years did you guys say you've been racing greyhounds?
11.
Oh,
11 years, but 6 times on over dog years, of course.
Right.
Being aided by a con artist / dog trainer, played by John Leguizamo. And then the rest of the movie becomes about dog racing. I'm not kidding. It takes up the next 40 minutes of the movie. I was wondering why a greyhound was featured on some of the posters. It's because he becomes essential to the plot. Leguizamo gets just about as much screen time as the two leads for the rest of the movie, for hilarious scenes like this.
Oh, breathe. Breathe, that's it.
It's like the writers had an idea for 4 different plots and couldn't decide which one to use, so they just threw them all together and gave the most time to the dog racing one. Why couldn't this plot just be about them trying to raise the original $20,000 for the house? Ralph and Ed could have still blown the money on something dumb, then scrambled for different ways to raise the money, working one odd job after another. This way they could have paid tribute to certain episodes of the show, while also doing their own thing. They could have even kept the dog racing plot, just not for half of the movie. This movie has a problem with taking simple comedy scenarios that made the sitcom great and blowing them up to extravagant proportions. For instance, they recreate the famous pool hall gag here. In the original show, Norton had this running gag where he would take forever to do something really simple. The comedy would come from the audience watching Ralph's frustration gradually build over Norton's time-consuming antics.
Come on!
In this movie, it starts as a fun homage, but then they find the need to ramp it up to the extreme by having this happen.
Hey! Oh, it's on, baby! Ralphie! No!
It just takes what should have been a simple comedy joke and homage and makes it so over the top in execution. But that's how all the comedy in this movie is. Here's another example. Ralph and Ed get trapped on the fire escape, and Norton thinks they're going to die. Simple. He then makes a confession.
One day I was coming down there to get some milk from y'all on the fire escape, and I seen Alice naked.
That becomes creepy real fast.
And sometimes I think about it.
We just really didn't need that last exchange in there. It'd have been much better if Ralph just exploded at the initial confession.
And I seen Alice naked.
This movie does this a lot. It's like the writers wrote a punchline for each joke, then they tried to top it with yet another punchline. It really ruins the comedic pacing for most of the movie.
The velour fanny pack.
That's a man purse. And I was this close to getting Al Roker to wear one on the Today Show, wasn't I?
He sure was. He was this close as I was with him today.
You're not helping, Ed.
And then all this dog racing plot with Leguizamo, it just makes me ask, what was the point of calling this movie The Honeymooners? Aside from a few homages and the character names, there's little about this movie that actually relates to the original show. I mean, Jackie Gleason doesn't even get a special thanks or credited for creating The Honeymooners. The only credit that ties it to the original show is this. So in calling it The Honeymooners, was the studio trying to tap into an audience of a show made 50 years ago? Did they think that people who were fans of the original would turn up in droves to see this movie simply because it's also called The Honeymooners? It's just one of those really dumb studio choices that got this movie a lot of unfair hate. In essence, it's just a forgettable comedy movie, but because they chose to brand it as The Honeymooners, it became universally hated just based on the concept alone. They could have just called this movie Dog Days or something stupid like that, made the marketing more about the dog racing plot, and I guarantee it wouldn't have a 3.3 on IMDb. Hell, I mean, the Flintstones movie with John Goodman is a more accurate Honeymooners adaptation than this. So let me just say this to movie studios pursuing remakes of original movies and shows that people love. Call it something else. Branding something a remake of an original property that has a fanbase does nothing but hurt it in the long run. It will confuse the audience members who aren't familiar with the original and just anger those who are familiar. I talked a while back about a movie called Brain Donors that I've come to love. It's essentially a Marx Brothers movie made in the 90s, but guess what? It's not branded as the Marx Brothers, and the characters don't share the names as the famous trio. It's a remake in spirit only, and a hell of a lot better received than this. For what it's worth, I actually like the scenes in this movie that were inspired by the original show. The cast do a great job of reinventing characters from a show over 5 decades old. I just would have much rather this movie be an homage in spirit rather than in title, because it really doesn't deserve so much hate for not even really being a remake. I actually recommend you check this one out and form your own opinions on it, but also check out the original show for that matter too.
Hello, boy!
As with other forgotten failures I've covered, it appears there is yet another reboot happening, this time for TV. And to whoever is developing that show,
You are a